And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I'm not sure if you have the same allergy that I have. I have an allergy to just kind of bleary-eyed optimism. I have an allergy to when things are going bad and people just insist that it's going to be okay. And they insist that if I just pick my head up, things are going to go just fine. I think there's a place for that. I think we need friends in our lives who do speak positively. But maybe I have a rebellious spirit. I'm not sure what it is. But when someone gives me sort of a trite saying, things like, you remember Finding Nemo? Dory, she said, just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. That's all well and good when things are minor, but when things are major, just keep swimming is a damning word. It is not a life-giving word. It is one that makes you feel worse about yourself. It makes things harder. You start to wonder, is this my fault? And perhaps it is, but as well-intentioned as that word is, it doesn't help sometimes, does it? No, when we experience real grief or real trouble, real depression, real heartbreak, little sayings don't do it, do they? If you look at Jeremiah's words this morning, you've probably felt these words before. These might have been your prayers at one time. My joy is gone. Grief is upon me. My heart is sick. Now, I know that's heavy going for 10:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning, but I know you felt that way before. I know you've had some experience in your life where those were words that you said in your own heart. And yeah, people are well-intentioned. They mean well when they say things like, well, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. That sounds really good until, your grandmother dies. It's hard to make lemonade when you lose a loved one, or you're going through a divorce, or the economy crashes and you just can't find a job. We need optimists in our lives, but let's be real. Scripture's being real this morning. Sometimes there's no earthly help. There's nothing on this side that can do anything for us. I mean, could you imagine Jeremiah's friends saying that? Just make lemonade, Jeremiah. Things will get better. Jeremiah knew what he was walking into. When he was very young, the Lord claimed him and said, you're going to preach a hard word. It's going to be really difficult. It doesn't make it any easier, but as the time comes, he says these words. And he asks the question, is the Lord not here in Zion? Where's our king? In the face of that question, there seems to be nothing but God's silence. And I know you've felt that before. You've prayed and you've asked for something and you've just, God, please take this away, or God, do something. And it seems sometimes all we get is his silence. I want to talk more about that in a little bit, but I just wanted to frame it for you. I know you've all been there. You may be there this morning. I don't know. And if you're not, hopefully this word will catch you at some point when you need it. See, the truth is, we as Christians, we don't often talk about hard things, do we? We like to gloss over. It's not a Christian thing, really. I think it's an American thing. Maybe it's a human thing. But I think it's kind of taken on a cancer in Christian life, where Christians even don't like to talk about their struggles. They don't like to talk about when things are difficult. Just turn on the radio and listen to Christian music for just 10 minutes and tally up what you hear. 98% of it is just positive thinking. I mean, there's some good artists out there, don't get me wrong, but so much of the market is saturated just with positive thinking. Now, every once in a while, you'll come across a gem, and it plumbs the depths of our pain and our sorrow and where God really is in the midst of that. But most of the time, it's just the same old stuff that you would see anywhere else. And I think part of it is because we're uncomfortable with grief. I mean, you've been in a situation before, right, where someone just breaks down in tears in front of you? And our instinct is to want to grab Kleenexes and fix the problem because we're uncomfortable. That's one of the worst things you can do. You should just let a person cry. And if they want Kleenexes, they'll ask for it. But the moment you interrupt, you're saying, I'm uncomfortable with your grief. Please stop crying in front of me. I know you're not saying that outwardly, but that's what we mean. That's what is being conveyed. We're uncomfortable with grief, both our own and others. We're not used to acknowledging the elephant in the room, are we? And yet here is Jeremiah, and that long tradition of Hebrew prophets and psalmists who call a thing what it is. See, we as Christians can call a thing what it is. We don't have to lie and gloss over it. We don't have to make up a story or give ourselves positive thinking tactics to get around it. We can face it head on and say, no, this is not the way it's supposed to be, but here we are. You know that saying, it is what it is. Whenever someone says that, what they mean is, I don't like this situation. It is what it is. What that means is, I wish it wasn't this. But Jeremiah is not just dealing with personal heartbreak. I mean, he's seeing the city walls crumble before him. Our psalmist sums it up. Same time era as when Jerusalem was a heap of rubble. Jeremiah saw them take down the temple, burn down and melt all the gold and all the fine metals and send it off to Babylon and Assyria. I mean, he saw it right before him. And in the midst of these words he's given us, there's this sense that God is weaving his very own words into this. It's kind of hard to make out who's talking here. Is it Jeremiah talking or is it God? Well, it's both. Hear these words. For the hurt of my people, I am hurt. I mourn and dismay has taken hold of me. That's Jeremiah saying that, but rest assured, that's God saying that too. When he sees his people hurt, he takes that hurt on too. He feels the pain. And as St. Paul tells us in Romans 8, the Spirit is groaning within us. And so when these words come out of your mouth, my joy is gone, grief is upon me, my heart is sick. Perhaps that's God's very Spirit moving in you, saying these are not the way things are meant to be. But our grief remains, and despite having friends who don't acknowledge it, or maybe do acknowledge it but want to move on, these are our prayers at times, and it's a valid part of our faith to cry out unto God. I think we edit so many of our prayers. We like to think they have to be neat and tidy and orderly and grammatically correct and pleasant. But God's ears are used to these kind of words. You don't have to feign a sense of piousness. You can just cry out unto God. He's big enough to take it. And as I said before, perhaps it's His very Spirit moving in you to cry those words out. But when you've experienced real grief, you find yourself doing and saying things that you wouldn't do otherwise, or perhaps you shut down. There's a scene in a movie called A Ghost Story. I don't know if you've seen this, a little independent film. There's a scene where the woman who's lost her husband, she's trying to go back to her 9 to 5, so to speak. She's trying to go back to daily life, and she gets home from work one evening and just sits on the kitchen floor with a whole entire pie. And I've never seen a scene quite like this in a movie, but for 5 minutes straight, the camera is fixed on her. I mean, just fixed on her as she eats the entire pie. Have you ever been so upset that you could eat a whole pan of pie? I know you have. I could eat 2. I wasn't even upset. Just wait till I'm really crying, see what I can do with a pint of ice cream. But what that scene depicts is how real suffering is and how uncomfortable it is. It's an uncomfortable scene. I mean, watching her messily scarf down this pie, it's almost meditative in the way that they've filmed it, but it's uncomfortable too. See, my point this morning, friends, is that is fully human experience. There's no hiding. There's no getting around it. And sure, we want to sweep it under the rug when we come to church on Sunday or when we see our friends, but God sees that grief, and He knows it's real. And it's okay to let it cry out unto Him. And just as real as that grief is for you, it's real for Him too. In the perceived silence of God, He's actually quite articulate in how He feels about your situation. He's not left you and abandoned you. He's not betrayed you. Though it feels that way, and though it felt that way in Jeremiah's day. For God's promises are sure. And this is not me sneaking in last minute with a trite saying. But it's the only thing that keeps me going is God's promises. Yes, in the midst of real suffering. Yes, in the midst of real grief. But if I don't have something to hang my hat on, what's it all worth? If I didn't believe in this gospel message, I promise you I wouldn't be here right now. I'd probably be still sleeping in or perhaps playing golf, maybe eating 2 pans of pie. We quickly want to come in with a quick fix, but it's not always a quick fix, is it? It was a long time before Jeremiah's woes were restored. And him personally, he never felt the restoration. It wasn't for several hundred years later that Jerusalem was rebuilt. And for you and me in our grief and our struggles, it may not be today. It probably won't even be tomorrow. It may not even be in this lifetime that things are remedied. But God's promise is sure. Now, it's rare that we get an opportunity to talk about things like this. It's kind of a strange thing in the middle of September to have a text like this, isn't it? We're just kind of plugging along. We're used to, just the gospel reading so bizarre this morning, I kind of wanted to avoid it, just because it's a difficult text, too, in its own way. But outside of funerals and big national vigils and catastrophes, we really don't think about these things, do we? So maybe you're here this morning, maybe you need this word. If not, put it in your back pocket. And maybe when a time comes, you'll need it. Knowing that God is there with you in the midst of your grief, feeling your grief. He's not one who's foreign to it himself. He took it on most profoundly and chiefly through his Son, Jesus Christ. His tears were our tears. His bloodshed was ours. His wounds were ours. His sorrow was ours. He took it all on. And he continues to take it on. So instead of quickly passing you a handkerchief or a Kleenex, God patiently waits for your heart to perhaps break a little. I don't know why he does it, but he does it. But in allowing you to honestly say, Lord, my heart is broken, that's the moment when you can hear the good news of someone who specializes in fixing broken hearts. But if you don't acknowledge it, and if you just kind of sweep it under the rug, you miss the good news. You have to take on suffering and pain and grief and trouble full, boring ahead, so that you can actually taste the good news of the gospel. I don't have to convince you of that, because I know you've all been in the gutter, so to speak. You've been in the ditch, and you're waiting for someone to pull you out. We don't have the promise here in this text today, but that promise is there. It's latent in those words. Jeremiah wouldn't cry out to God if he knew God wouldn't do something. But he knows God is going to do something. You and I know God is going to do something, and he has done something. And he is doing something, and he will do something. So this morning, I'm not sneaking it in through the back door. I want to acknowledge the grief. I want to acknowledge the pie eating right now and say it's fully valid. Your doubts, your fears, they're all valid. And you may weep day and night, as Jeremiah did in his time. But the promise is that one day he will wipe every tear from your face. It's not to be trite. It's not to say pick yourself up. It's not to say keep swimming. But it's to say it will be there if it's not already. So the question posed, is there no balm in Gilead? Jeremiah knows there is. And you know it too. So this morning, as these words strike you, and perhaps as you make your way to the rail, receive that good promise from God right now. Even if things aren't tidied up and perfect today or tomorrow, that promise stands with you, that he'll leave you nor forsake you never. And Jesus Christ stands as a testament to that. Because yes, there was the cross, but by golly, for sure, there was the resurrection. And on that we can hang our hats. Thanks be to God.